told them the truth, they locked me away because I refused to stay silent.
It was a silent autumn morning, like that moment just before dawn, when the world seems to hold its breath and every distant sound carries a weight of its own. The black iron gates of Saint Elora Convent creaked open, their rusted hinges whispering secrets long buried. Claire Barlow paused at the threshold, drawing in a sharp breath, thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten prayers. 24 years ago, those very gates witnessed the final footsteps of Sister Marianne. She had passed through here, her habit brushing against the stone floor, her heart brimming with faith and hope. Only 2 weeks remained before she would take her perpetual vows, a sacred commitment, silence, obedience, and a life bound to a faith most could scarcely comprehend. Yet on that October morning in 1999, when the bell rang for morning prayer, the chapel stood empty. Claire stepped inside. The courtyard bricks, still slick with dew, glistened beneath her feet. Fallen leaves clung to her shoes. Under the dim glow of the lanterns lining the corridor, she imagined the slender figure of Sister Marianne gliding between the pillars. Instead, there was only abandonment, beds still tightly made, rosaries still hanging on the window ledges, and a pair of leather shoes gone without a trace. The chapel door, thick wood reinforced with wrought iron, was bolted shut from the inside, as if Marianne had chosen to vanish into thin air. For decades, rumors had lingered within these walls. Some claimed Marianne had lost faith and fled. Others swore they had seen her silhouette flicker through the forest at twilight. The church quietly closed the case, calling it a spiritual crisis, a mystery to be whispered only in the dark. But Claire, raised on church stories and a childhood spent listening to her aunt's hushed recollections, never accepted such a convenient answer. When the letter came last winter, rough paper, trembling handwriting, she knew the silence was about to shatter. She came back once, but they sent her away. Just 6 words, cold as ice. Now she stood amid the faint flicker of candles and the chilled air, determined to unearth the secrets long buried. As Claire walked the dim hallway toward the chapel, she sensed it, footsteps echoing too lightly, like a trick of the mind. One candle flared brighter, though no one had touched it. And at the threshold, she found it. A pale blue rosary bead, long thought lost, resting neatly on the stone floor. It was freezing against her palm, and in that moment, the weight of 24 years crashed onto her shoulders. She slipped the bead into her coat pocket and stepped inside. The world narrowed into the scent of old incense clinging to pews, the soft drip of water from the high ceiling. Claire closed her eyes, picturing Marianne kneeling there, lost in prayer, believing with all her heart that God would answer, that he would never let her slip away. Claire opened her eyes and gazed at a stained glass window, depicting a young nun in white robes, hands clasped in silent devotion. The morning light cast hues of green and gold across the nun's face, an image of Marianne forever hopeful, forever present. Yet, Claire felt something else stir within her, a tremor, a truth unspoken by the walls around her. Marianne hadn't merely vanished, she had been taken. Or perhaps she had chosen to disappear, for reasons no one dared confess. A breath of courage pressed gently on Claire's shoulders. She would turn every page of silent journals, every hushed rumor, until Marianne's story was told again. This time, no one could deny it. Tonight, she would begin with that single rosary bead and listen to the honest whispers hidden in the shadows of Saint Elora. It was on a drizzly, late winter afternoon when Claire stood frozen before the old wooden box on the small altar in Aunt Felicity's convent room. The box, etched with a faded crucifix, had remained sealed for years, until Claire heard a soft click and the lid creaked open, though no one had touched it. Inside was only a single folded letter, the handwriting trembling, as if it had been written in the dead of night. Claire pulled the letter out, her fingers slightly shaking. She came back once, but they turned her away. No signature, no greeting, no punctuation, just that chilling sentence. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the glass, echoing the unease rising within her. Who hadn't signed the letter? And who would dare write something like that from within the convent itself? The next morning, Claire didn't hesitate. She wrapped herself in a warm coat, the letter clutched tightly in her hand, and boarded the last bus winding down the tree-lined path. The rain had stopped, but puddles still mirrored the dim sky in streaks of silver. The winding road to Saint Elora felt longer than ever. Each turn obscured the looming silhouette of the convent, rising like an ancient outpost watching over forgotten truths. Convent, rising like an ancient outpost watching over forgotten truths. As the iron gates groaned open, she heard bats fluttering away beneath the canopy of leaves. No one came to greet her. Her footsteps pressed softly into the damp ground, leaving imprints just deep enough to remind her she wasn't alone. Step by step, she followed the stone-tiled hallway. The candles lining the walls flickered drowsily, flames dancing like weary souls of the nuns who once lived here. Claire paused at the window of Marianne's old bedroom, its stained glass cracked and dulled. She leaned in, gently wiped away the dust, and touched the wooden photo frame on the desk. Sister Marianne, smiling in her new habit, eyes sparkling with faith. Beside it, a faint smudge stained the corner, like a tear that had dried too slowly, trailing down toward the edge of a diary. Claire's fingers skimmed the blank pages until they landed on a smudged line at the bottom. "I'm fine." The word fine was shaky, broken, like a message meant to soothe, yet tinged with bitterness. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her, but she memorized the ink strokes before the light could fade them further. Halfway down the hallway, Claire suddenly heard footsteps, light, deliberate, coming from the opposite door. She held her breath. The door opened slightly, revealing a pair of eyes that had seen a lifetime. Aunt Felicity, silver-haired, wrapped in an old, worn habit. She smiled faintly, her voice trembling like waves against a weathered shore. "You read the letter. I knew you would come." Claire looked directly into her eyes and felt a depth woven with grief and the faint glimmer of hope. In that moment, she realized, not all miracles announce themselves with grandeur. Sometimes, a miracle is no more than a fragile piece of paper trembling in a quiet corridor, just enough to guide someone toward a truth that refuses to die. And as Aunt Felicity pulled Claire into the room and gently closed the door behind them, both women felt it. The secret of Sister Marianne was about to be revealed. But it could also be the beginning of questions more haunting than they had ever dared to imagine. Claire followed Aunt Felicity up the worn stone stairs. The upper chamber was larger than a small house. Dozens of wooden engravings adorned the walls, each depicting Sister Marianne through different phases of her spiritual life, from innocent, wide-eyed novice to the composed face of a devoted servant of faith. Candlelight seeped in dimly through the window frame, casting long, slanted shadows across the room, making it feel both warm and achingly cold. Aunt Felicity paused before a carved wooden door adorned with daisies, the flower of hope. She gently turned the aged knob and opened it, revealing a narrow corridor heavy with the scent of sandalwood and old timber. But as Claire stepped through, a chill crept down her spine. She could hear faint footsteps echo behind her, soft and deliberate. Yet when she turned, the hallway lay empty. Rain pattered gently against a fractured stained glass window, each droplet crawling slowly down the wooden doorframe. In the corner of the room, an old, faded floral rug covered the stone floor. Claire knelt down and noticed a faint trail, clear imprints of bare feet. Not the padded steps of a nun's shoes, but the weary prints of someone walking barefoot for miles. Aunt Felicity approached, her gaze somber and distant. "Every night," she whispered, "someone passes through here." She sat down on an old wooden chair in the center of the room, gripping the armrests tightly, her voice barely audible. "Sometimes I hear quiet prayers, in Latin, but Sister Marianne never studied Latin." Claire stared at the rug, her hand trembling as she reached toward the edge of the faint footprint. "Only one person ever ran through here in the night," she murmured. Silence followed. All that remained was the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. The soft echo of steps seemed to drift away, like a reminder. The walls of Saint Elora held not only Sister Marianne's secrets, but also the hidden identities, unspoken vows, and forgotten sacrifices left behind in the silence. She stood up and walked toward the balcony at the end of the corridor. A crescent moon filtered through the arched window, its light dancing across the moss-covered tiles. Claire inhaled deeply and told herself, tonight, she wouldn't just collect physical evidence. She would listen to every breath, every lingering trace, every whisper the convent still held after 24 years of silence. Claire didn't return to her room. Instead, she kept walking down the dim corridor until she stumbled upon a narrow alcove filled with old belongings. An auxiliary altar layered in dust, mildewed bookshelves, and a rosary rack that had never once stood empty. She paused, examining each bent iron hook. Suddenly, her left foot nudged against something hard. The light bud startled her with its innocence. A rolled piece of paper nestled beneath the rack's lowest hook. She crouched and picked it up, heart skipping slightly as she read the shaky scrawl of 2 words. "I'm fine." No punctuation, no signature, just 2 trembling words that felt more like whispered confessions, scribbled by someone pacing these very halls in quiet torment. While Claire was still processing the note, the candle atop the side altar suddenly flickered to life. Just moments ago, she had seen it die out completely. The flame crackled, casting gold and crimson shadows that danced like restless spirits on the walls. And just as suddenly, the flame extinguished, snuffed out as if by an unseen breath. Claire flinched, inhaling sharply the acrid scent of half-burnt beeswax. The rain outside still tapped gently against the windows, but now it pulsed in sync with her heart, each drop echoing her unease. She tucked the paper into her coat pocket and rushed from the shrine, eyes scanning the corridor for any trace of life. But there was no one. Just the smell of aged incense clinging to the sandalwood walls. From somewhere in the distance, she heard faint footsteps, barely audible, like breath against glass. She spun around, heart racing. No figure, not even a blur. Claire pressed herself against the cold wall, pulse hammering in her chest. She whispered to herself, "Silence isn't proof of innocence, but here, silence feels like a confession." She stepped out into the main hall, facing a stone relief of Saint Mary, with her arms outstretched in protection. A ceiling lamp shone down onto the polished altar slab, reflecting Claire's own face etched with worry and longing. She bowed her head, murmuring under her breath, "Marianne, if you really came back, leave us a real message. Don't stop at 'I'm fine.'" The silence hung thick until a bell chimed, but it wasn't the usual call to prayer. It was strange, lingering, a prolonged echo that stretched for several beats. Then abruptly stopped. Claire raised her hand to her ear, closing her eyes as if trying to absorb every note, every aftersound. When she opened them again, the great chapel doors, previously locked behind her, stood slightly ajar. A sliver of cold white light spilled across the floor like a line drawn in chalk. For a moment, she stood frozen. Then she turned away. She descended the stone steps slowly, a new thought blooming in her mind. Every sign pointed to this. Marianne had been here, and she had left behind traces. Now it was Claire's turn to continue what Marianne had started. With the note clenched tightly in her pocket, Claire looked up toward the stained glass arch where moonlight slashed across the rooftops. The cloistered corridor had fallen silent again. But in that silence, she heard something clear and undeniable. This was Marianne's first message to the world, and the story was only just beginning. Claire lifted her gaze, eyes steely with resolve. She knew each step taken in this place led deeper into mystery, toward the haunting question of who had kept Marianne hidden and why. Instead of returning to her room, she veered down the third corridor, the path that had slowly drawn her to the heart of the monastery's long-held silence. The hallway was silent and cloistered, dim yellow light reflecting weakly off cold stone. Claire paused before a small wooden door, barely wide enough for a single person to pass through. Carved into the wood, now faded with age, were the Latin words, Tempus fugit, time flies. She placed her hand on the iron latch and inhaled, lungs filled with both hope and simmering fury. "This is it," she whispered. Inside was a small, solitary chamber, clearly once belonging to Sister Marianne. The room felt like a keepsake frozen in time, a worn wooden desk stained with ink blots, a lone family photo of Marianne, crooked on the wall, and a dusty bookshelf lined with dog-eared prayer books. On the table sat a wilting vase of flowers, slightly tipped, as if time itself had grown tired. Claire stepped forward, her eyes locking on a weathered leather journal, Marianne's final diary. The last page lay open, and the final entry read, "They say silence is the foundation of faith. But if silence is the burial ground of the soul, then I choose to speak." Beneath those words, Marianne had placed a jade pendant, a signature belonging unmistakably to her. The air tightened in Claire's throat. She reached for the pendant, fingers trembling as she touched what felt like the last breath of Marianne's voice. The words and relic struck a quiet ache in her chest. Marianne had once loved her faith deeply, but in the end, it was that very vow of silence that had cost her everything. From outside the door, hurried footsteps echoed, closer, no longer waiting. Claire turned the pages quickly, her eyes scanning with urgency. At the very back, the handwriting burned with purpose. "They will never forgive what I've learned. But if anyone dares to come, find the cave beneath the cellar, where the light never goes out." Claire froze. This was it, the clue she'd been chasing. Despite the weight of fear and expectation in her chest, she allowed herself a small smile. There would be no more hiding, no more waiting. With the journal clutched tightly in one hand and the jade pendant in the other, she turned toward the opposite door and descended a stone staircase into the monastery's underground, drawn by a sound deeper than echo, deeper than memory. The sound of truth rising from silence. And when she stepped onto the final stone at the bottom of the cellar, a faint glow peeked through a crack in the rock wall, a thin golden light mixed with the smoky scent of incense. It called to her, promising at last the answer to 24 years of silence. Claire bent low, letting her toes feel the cracks of the cold stone steps. In the dim glow of the final candle, the entire space fell into a silence so profound it seemed ready to shatter with the revelation of a long-buried secret. To her right, an old wooden door murmured as night wind crept through. To her left, a faded Latin phrase was carved into the cold wall: Audi vide tace. Hear, see, be silent. Suddenly, Claire sensed a faint breath behind her. She turned. The candle flame jumped, flickering light across a familiar face. Aunt Felicity, aged and worn by time, her eyes red with unshed tears. Her lips trembled, as if she'd spent decades suppressing something sacred. "You've come this far," Felicity whispered, her voice blending with the rhythmic drip of old pipes. "I never wanted to speak of this, but silence no longer deserves respect." Claire inhaled, finding a spot against the stone wall to steady herself. She looked at her aunt with eyes filled with both compassion and determination. "Please, tell me everything. I need to hear it all." Felicity nodded slowly, stepping toward the candle that hung above the altar. The tiny flame cast flickering shadows of the two women across the stone, a pair of final witnesses to what happened in 1999. Sitting gently on the altar's edge, Felicity dabbed her tears with a frayed handkerchief and began. "When Marianne disappeared, we were already deep into dark days. Not because she was gone, but because we were afraid. This monastery, always cloaked in silence, hid secrets too monstrous to voice. Things we only dared whisper in the night, yet they carved themselves into our bones." Her trembling hands lifted a faded prayer book, flipping through pages blurred by age until she stopped at the Pater Noster, the Lord's Prayer. Her voice cracked. On her last night, Marianne clung to this book. She wasn't afraid of sin. She was afraid of the vow, one you and I both now understand. A vow forged in blood and the tears of strangers. They came, men in power, not of the cloth, and they commanded her, "Say nothing of what lies behind these walls." She begged, she pleaded, but the order would not release her, and so she left, without goodbye. Claire felt her heart stall for a moment. Rain lashed harder at the storm doors above, as if trying to wash away decades of shadows. The scent of beeswax and wet stone carried her through a fear, no longer hers, but Marianne's. Felicity's voice turned hoarse. They locked her in the room next door. No light, barely any air. The chains were invisible, but real. That first night, she walked and sobbed until her voice was raw. The next night, she sat still, staring through the tiny window as they told her silence is the supreme virtue. Claire's tears spilled, but she wiped them away, anchoring her mind. "Why didn't you stop them?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Why didn't you save her?" Felicity closed her eyes, her sigh full of decades. "I had no power. They bound me, just as they did the others. If we spoke, they would kill what little faith we had left." Marianne chose differently, chose the painful kind of freedom, freedom in isolation. Silence fell. The rain roared above them like thunderous grief. Claire gripped her aunt's hand, finding warmth in the cold weight of truth. She whispered, "I won't let her story die. I'll free her. And I'll free everyone still imprisoned by this silence." Felicity's eyes opened, now glimmering with hope. "Be careful. This truth could destroy what's left of us. But believe me, if someone dares to listen, someone else will dare to speak, and someone will dare to change." At that moment, Claire understood. This wasn't just the disappearance of a girl. It was a rupture in power, in belief, in the unspoken terror behind faith cloaked in obedience. As she stepped out of the cellar, she relit a nearby candle, her first declaration in the crusade for a truth long buried. Claire stepped out of the basement, clutching her racing heart. The corridor above remained eerily silent, candlelight flickering, casting long, wavering shadows of two figures across moss-stained walls. She glanced back at Aunt Felicity one last time before the lantern dimmed, leaving behind only thick darkness and the heady scent of mildew. On the winding path toward the monastery's archive room, Claire murmured a vow under her breath. "I will not submit to silence." The archive door creaked open, revealing leather-bound books, stacks of old files, and yellowed hymn sheets. The crystal light from an oil lamp glistened gently, tracing soft lines into aged wood. She worked quickly, opening box after box, searching for any clue pointing to the one in power who had commanded the silence. Finally, inside a small locked chest, she found a sealed brown envelope. On its surface, written in faded ink, "For the Mother Superior only." Claire's heart sank as she held it, knowing she was about to touch the very core of a buried authority. As her fingers peeled back the seal, smeared words appeared, a list of 12 names, including Marianne and Felicity. Numbers were scribbled beside them, and terse notes followed. Sworn to silence, must pay the price. Claire broke down in tears. The silence had never just been a vow. It was a shackle, paid with fear and bribes. From the hallway outside, hurried footsteps echoed. Claire quickly tucked the envelope into her coat and slipped toward a small window. Moonlight spilled across her tear-streaked eyes, as if the night sky itself shared her sorrow. Clouds drifted by, trees bent. The darkness exhaled with every step she took. She knew then, silence could no longer be kept. Claire shattered the window, squeezing through the jagged frame onto the mossy roof. Every stone beneath her foot demanded courage. Every cold metal grip stung her fingers. She landed in the garden behind the convent, wilted flower beds bowing as if to welcome her fall. At that moment, a bell rang, not for prayer, but as an alarm. Without hesitation, Claire sprinted past the iron gates, leaving behind the scent of burnt wax and damp stone. She bolted to Aunt Felicity's room, flicked on the lamp, and spread the documents across the table. The smoke from her lit cigarette curled slowly around her face like a quiet rebellion against the night. And there, between the records, she found a photograph. Marianne, standing before the monastery door, smiling faintly. But her eyes, they held something unspeakable. Behind her, a faint shadow, an indistinct figure, extended a finger toward the camera. The photo had yellowed with age, but it spoke volumes. Marianne had been watched from the beginning, even as she disappeared. Claire closed her eyes, recalling Felicity's words. If someone dares come here, someone else will dare to change it. She wasn't alone anymore. The fire in her chest refused to be silenced. She opened her old laptop, ready to send the files to the press, to the courts, to anyone brave enough to listen. Outside, a strong autumn wind stirred, tossing restless leaves into a quiet dance, as if celebrating the day silence was finally broken. And in that little room, the oil lamp still flickered, small, but just bright enough to fuel the voices the world had never dared to hear. Claire barely slept that night. As the first mist of a late winter dawn settled over the small house just outside the convent, she sat upright before a scattered pile of documents. The dim yellow light flickered in her tired, shadowed eyes. The aged photograph, the trembling letter, and the list of names had revealed something beyond speculation. A high-ranking force had chained Sister Marianne into silence. She rummaged through the envelope for more clues and found a faded wooden-framed postcard. On its front, an image of Saint Elora Monastery, viewed from its main gate. On the back, a smudged line of handwriting that read, "Meet me beneath the last lantern at midnight." No signature, just the ink bleeding through time. At the stroke of 12, Claire carefully returned to the monastery's main hallway, her footsteps soft as breath. The candles had long since gone out, leaving behind only a fragile darkness. She made her way to the final lantern, near the meditation room, where an old oil lamp flickered faintly, as if waiting for her. Silence can't hide everything forever. A voice spoke softly behind her. Claire turned and found herself face to face with Sister Agatha, a middle-aged nun with silvered hair and eyes sharp yet heavy with sorrow. She invited Claire to sit beside her on the stone bench, her thin hands trembling in prayerful knots. "You came here seeking the truth," Sister Agatha began, her voice shaky but firm. "But understand this, what happened was not merely a disappearance. It was a betrayal of faith and the sanctity of this convent." Claire said nothing. Her gaze urged Agatha to go on. Sister Agatha drew in a long breath. On the night she vanished, Marianne overheard a secret meeting between the Reverend Mother and a senior diocesan leader. They discussed an alternate path, a pact with outside forces to preserve the monastery's wealth and influence. Marianne, pure-hearted and devout, couldn't bear that the convent would trade its faith. She wrote a letter crying for help. But before she could speak out, they silenced her, bound her by oath and imprisoned her in the basement. The oil flame flickered. Claire's eyes flashed with rage. "When did you hear this?" "I was on night duty," Sister Agatha whispered. "I heard her crying. I heard her whisper, 'Please, don't leave me alone.' But I did nothing. I feared losing my faith, feared losing my life. I chose silence." Her voice broke. Tears streamed down Claire's cheeks. She grasped Agatha's hands. "You chose silence to protect the convent. But this truth must come to light. I will expose it." Agatha nodded, a single tear slipping from her lined face. "Pray for Marianne's soul. Then give the world what you found. It's the only way to redeem what we've done." Before Claire left, Sister Agatha pulled her close and handed her a small wooden box. Inside, a jade necklace, Marianne's, worn during her first and only vow ceremony. "Keep it," she murmured. "It will lead you to the final truth." As Claire ascended the stairway, the first rays of sunlight pierced the stained glass, bathing her face in color and warmth, banishing the last of the night. Her heart beat with a renewed conviction. Tonight, the light from the necklace would guide her to the deepest secret, where Marianne's longing still lingers, where faith and betrayal converge, and where a young mother waits for answers after 24 years of silence. Claire clutched the jade necklace tightly as she hurried down the monastery's stone steps into the inner courtyard. Morning light trickled through the trees above, but in her heart there seemed to be only one patch of brightness left, a single anchor point in her search for the last trace Sister Marianne had left behind. This time, she didn't wander hallways or tear through old rooms. Claire held an old map she had found, along with the original, worn photo of Marianne, marked with a red cross near a hidden door on the monastery's east wall, obscured by overgrown hibiscus shrubs. She leaned in, listening to the wind whistle through the hollow bricks, then gently pushed the door open. A wave of rotting wood and mildew greeted her, A cold welcome, but one that whispered promises. The jade pendant brushed against the stone wall and glowed faintly like a firefly, illuminating a strange carved line. Claire scraped away decades of dust with her fingernail, revealing faded Latin text. Ubi lux, ubi mors. Where there is light, there is death. From her pocket, she drew a small blade and traced the carving. The wall split, revealing a narrow, descending passageway cloaked in shadow. Her feet trembled, but she pressed forward, stepping onto moss-covered stone steps. Each step echoed loudly in the still air, as if urging her deeper into the monastery's buried secrets. At the bottom, she found an old chapel, its altar cracked and sagging, the walls adorned with black and white photographs, one of Marianne standing beside an unfamiliar bishop, her smile hard and unreadable, unlike the other portraits. Claire approached the altar and scanned its drawers with her flashlight. In the second, she discovered a tightly folded notebook. The cover read Marianne B. Inside, a single note scrawled hastily, "To the one who finds this, if your heart is brave enough, continue the final flame." Beneath it, a sketch of a tall lamp at the center of the room, the very spot where Claire had met Sister Agatha. She placed the necklace gently onto the diary's page. The jade glinted, casting a pattern on the stone wall, forming the outline of another narrow passage. Claire understood. Marianne had created a secret door, one that led to the forbidden archive, the monastery's hidden library of banned texts. Without hesitation, she crawled through the narrow opening. As her eyes adjusted to the dark, she stood before a massive wooden shelf packed with books and parchment rolls. At the center stood a sealed wooden crate, its lid etched with a single word, Veritas, truth. With trembling hands, Claire pried it open. Inside, stacks of documents, transcripts from clandestine meetings, letters exchanged between the monastery and a high-ranking diocesan official, and several cassette tapes Marianne had hidden. She inserted one into a small recorder. Crackling static. Then a soft, quivering voice. Marianne, whispering prayers, then testifying. Accusations of abuse of power, corruption, and then the breaking point. They imprisoned her because she dared to speak. They said if she stayed silent, she'd be spared. But now, I'm not afraid anymore. The tape ended with a long pause. Only the faint echo of her voice lingered. Please, bring this truth into the light. The recorder's glow dimmed. Claire's tear-streaked face flickered in its reflection. She stood now at the edge of two worlds, the oppressive silence of Saint Elora, and the searing truth begging to be revealed. Claire bent down to gather the precious tapes and documents, then retraced the short underground path back to the auxiliary crypt. The jade pendant still shimmered on her neck, like a lifeline guiding her path. Each step on the stone staircase echoed endlessly within the moldy walls, as if whispering, "Every footstep is remembered." When Claire emerged into the main corridor, dusk had already fallen. Raindrops drizzled, washing away the dirt from the crevices in the walls. She hurried across the courtyard gate, turned on the recorder, and recorded a brief confession. "I've found the truth. Marianne never left this place. She was forced into silence. I'm on my way to the light." The recording played back, mingled with the sound of rain. Then she shut it off and tucked it into her coat pocket. Claire climbed over the fence at the old gap in the wall, her silhouette flickering like a faint but resolute flame. Upon reaching the small old capital town near the convent, she stopped at an internet cafe, turned on a computer, and uploaded the entire trove to an anonymous blog, along with the audio and document photos. The headline rang loud: Saint Elora, secrets buried beneath the silence of the convent. Within an hour, the post was being widely shared on investigation forums and across social media platforms like Kakao. Rumors began to swirl. Did Sister Marianne really return? Who bound her with the vow of silence? What is the convent hiding? Claire sat in front of the screen, heart pounding. She had just planted the seed of truth in the public's conscience. The next morning, the first brown envelope from the press arrived at Aunt Felicity's address. "We would like to meet Ms. Barlow," the letter read. Simultaneously, a team of federal journalists reached out to launch an investigation. At dawn, Claire drove back to the convent, this time not only to search for clues, but to confront those who had silenced Marianne, and to give Marianne a chance to reclaim her stolen voice. She knew. The night over Saint Elora was not yet over. The revelations were only a prelude. But this time, she was no longer alone. Truth was spreading. Light was breaking through, and the footsteps of a young missing nun, at last, would lead to justice. And that was the moment Claire stepped through the iron gate, clutching the folder of documents in her hand, ready to ignite a chain of events that would never again allow silence to return. Claire sped down the leaf-covered road, heading straight for Saint Elora, her heart on the verge of bursting. The rain still fell lightly through the wind, carrying with it every sound and trace of yesterday. By the time she arrived, dusk had descended, and the dim yellow lights illuminated the path around the moss-covered abbey. The iron gate creaked open as she pressed the bell, expecting the same old silence. But this time, there was more than just the night wind. A group of reporters and 2 federal agents were already waiting. Cameras and microphones pointed toward her entrance. Claire stepped forward, handed the folder of documents to the lead investigator, and raised a microphone handed to her by the first reporter. "Ms. Barlow, who are you accusing?" the reporter asked sharply. Claire took a deep breath. "Everything I've uncovered is here," she said, her voice resonating through the night. From the trembling letter, the cold rosary bead, to the list of 12 names and the audio recordings that reveal how Marianne was silenced. These individuals used faith to hide corruption and betrayal. The camera panned to Aunt Felicity's face. Her tears had dried, and her weathered expression now gleamed with pride. The FBI director nodded, ordering the temporary detention of several former convent officials for further investigation. Claire pulled the jade pendant from around her neck and held it up beneath the camera flashes. This necklace, she emphasized, was Marianne's final mark. It proves she never lost faith, and today, with the light of truth, we will no longer remain silent. Lenses turned to the poster hanging outside the foyer. Justice for Sister Marianne. Officers entered the convent. Its doors opened, not to silence, but to the footsteps of justice. 1 week later, Claire returned to the abbey, not as a journalist, but as a companion to the community. At the candlelight vigil honoring Marianne, under the warm glow, each face of the convent members reflected hope and release. The bells rang, not to mark a prayer hour, but to honor a truth finally revealed. Claire stood beneath the statue of Saint Mary, gazing up at the mural where Marianne once painted hope. In her hands was a small book, the Diary of Marianne. Selected writings, now printed and distributed to convents across the United States. She quietly lit a new candle at the side altar, breathing in the scent of beeswax and mulberry. Aunt Felicity came to her side, placed a hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you, child. Thank you for the courage that freed Marianne's soul." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening, not just for her, but for all who were ever forced into silence. Outside the convent gates, The sky had begun to clear. Claire brushed the dust off her coat, preparing to leave. She paused, looking back toward the abbey, where those ancient stone walls had finally found their voice, and where the light of truth would never again be extinguished. The story of Sister Marianne came to a close, but the journey for justice and faith continued. The missing girl had reclaimed her voice, and the survivors had found their long-lost belief. Now, at the heart of Saint Elora, there was no more oppressive silence, only a hymn of hope that would echo forever. Sister Marianne's story is no longer trapped in silence, but for her voice to echo far and wide, we need you. If you believe truth is always worth pursuing, hit like and share this video with your friends, your family, or anyone fighting for justice. To uncover more hidden histories, gripping investigations, and untold cases that demand answers, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell now. And now, we want to hear from you. Do you believe Marianne truly found freedom in silence? Comment freedom if you believe in the miracle of truth, or justice if you believe only justice can set her soul free. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. This story doesn't end here. Join us on the journey to uncover what lies beneath.